Hello and welcome back to the Insight on a No Ratings pod. It's that time on a Sunday, you're chilling, you're finding something to listen to, some sort of tactical nuggets of information. Well, you came in the right place. Pythag, as usual, is with me, and I can't lie, the consistency of this man to rock up every Sunday and go, you know what? We're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about that. And this is about Manchester United. I thought today was the day you were going to go, listen, let's just take the day off today.
No, we don't take days off, especially when it comes to Manchester United. And also, I think I need some kudos here. I think I predicted that United would get smoked by Brighton. And I've also said consistently, I said these results against Arsenal, against Liverpool, they were false results, and that we would get found out against smaller teams. And not only did we get absolutely ransacked by Southampton and got away with it. I don't think Brighton were that good today, but we still looked a second rate side today as well.
Yeah, we're going to get into where this game was decided. Tactically, though, and I think you just alluded to it there, and we said this before we started recording. The game, in my opinion, was decided by individuals. Pythag then said, but Brighton weren't that good. And I went, that's exactly what I mean. Like the individuals of Brighton were still better than Manchester United on a day when the individual players weren't particularly great. Before we get into all of that and talk about individuals, and probably the one reason where we think things are definitely going wrong, overall, tactically, what did you make of the game?
I'll be honest with you. I think it was a real mess tactically from both teams. I wasn't impressed with the structure of both teams. I felt like Brighton. I know a lot of people speak about the new manager and that he's brought new life to Brighton, and they played in like a 4-2-4
Hmm.
system in possession, but it leads to a very chaotic style of football. So if you recall under Potter, for example, it was very structured style of football, followed through into De Zerbi. And I felt like as a United fan, when we came against those type of teams, they outplayed us. They just played a better brand of football than us, and we couldn't keep up with that brand of football. Today,
Mm.
even though the result was pretty similar, as in it was in their favor, I never felt like we were being truly outclassed in possession. And they remind me a little bit of Bournemouth, where they make the game very chaotic and then they try and pierce you through their players like Minter, Mitoma, João Pedro, Welbeck. They've got very direct players within the front four. So in a way, you could argue that they're more outcome focused than they were in previous seasons, which is a positive. But at the same time, I felt like United were very much in the game until we conceded, obviously, the second goal from Brighton.
I think and I agree with you. I think Brighton are better to watch in some ways now. Like when the ball lands in the box, they're definitely more clinical than what they were under Potter and even De Zerbi, to be honest. But I do think because they were under De Zerbi, people immediately assume that they're still this tactically advanced team. But I think every time I've watched them this season, which is now probably about 7 or 8 times, but I think is a pretty good sample size, I've watched them and I thought, I don't think they're that special tactically anymore. But they've got athletes everywhere. And we're going to talk about a few of them. And on top of that, they're now just much more clinical and they're difficult to play against in that way. Whereas before, I think they were difficult to play against because they'd keep the ball off you, they'd suck you in. They've actually stopped doing that. I think they're much more direct now, and in a roundabout way, it makes them more difficult to play against. And then that leans into this game because United athletically and physically are so far below most teams in the league that this was just a game made for Brighton, I think.
In the first period of the game, Brighton pressed us quite heavily, and we were struggling to get out. It was a bit like Villa against Arsenal. We couldn't really get the ball forward. But funnily enough, once we conceded, it, it gave us like this impetus to be a bit more sharper on the ball. And then I felt like we were actually getting it into Xerxes. I thought Xerxes had a really interesting game in that he was actually being a bit of a focal point. There were times when he like would overrun with the ball, but
Mm.
compared to Hoyland, there was definitely better link up play there with Xerxes there, I felt. And he was making it stick, and then that was allowing him to become the pivot, which then allowed the others to flood in support of him. So then I felt in the first half, we then got back into the game, deservedly got back into the game. And I wouldn't say we were brilliant to watch, but we were being effective. And I felt that Brighton were having to counterattack against us in the first half. And then God knows what happened in the second half. It just felt like
this
Brighton had completely switched on. again, and they dominated pretty much. I felt.
This is where like the psychological element of it comes in, because you have said every time we've recorded and spoken about United, whether off air or while we're recording, um, those two Arsenal and Liverpool results, you cannot hang your hat on them because they're so different to these games. Well, like against Brighton, you're at Old Trafford, you have to take the game to them, and I still think Manchester United don't really have one the individuals and two players who want to take the responsibility to go, okay, it's 0-0. Can I be the guy? It feels like every player that is gonna come to the floor to do something is like in rescue mode all the time, and then at the end it becomes like a end of the game. You're going, like Bruno wants to cross it, so does Ahmad, so does Anthony, so does Ganache. Like everyone wants to be the hero at the end, but the time's already gone. Like you're 3-1 behind, and that's where I think psychologically this team's just never in tune with the game. They're always obviously, people would say tactically.
Just touching upon
This,
that tactically, then, because the reason why we struggle so much at home is the opposition are now expecting us to come on to them. The fans have a air of expectation as well. But then when you've got fullbacks like Dallo and Matsurawi, then there's no thrust coming from these wider areas. So then someone like Amad Diallo is like your only source of, and he's having to go past two, three, four players just to make something happen, which is
mm,
ridiculous. That's not a pattern of play. If you want to be a well coached, well drilled team at the elite level, there has to be a pattern of play. So, for example, there needs to be trigger movements. For example, Diallo's got the ball, he's about to cut in, then the right wing back needs to know, okay, now I'm going to go and bomb into that space because he's a left-footed player, so he's going to suck plays in that way. That's going to open up the space for me to put cross in. And then when he's about to make that movement, then the striker needs to know, where am I going to make the run? And then the attacking midfielders behind him need to know where they're going to make their run. The left wing back needs to know where I need to be if the ball comes back out. All of these things need to be planned to an absolute T, especially in the modern game. United don't give me any vibes of that whatsoever. And I'm really unhappy with Amorim at the moment in terms of his fullback selection. Is piss poor at the moment because he's picking fullbacks rather than actual wingers out wide. And one of the reasons why I was slightly a bit intrigued with him coming was I thought, is he going to make us a very attacking side? Is he going to use wing backs that are proper wingers? A bit like what we saw with Sporting Lisbon. We haven't seen none of that. We've just seen a really defensive, almost back five style system, and yet we're conceding goals by the bucket load. So it begs the question. If you're going to go with an overly pragmatic defensive approach and you can't defend, where's the sense in that? And he's doing it week after week after week, and it's really doing my nutting, to be honest.
I can tell. But I don't blame you, to be honest, because when I watched Ipswich City actually, and when Leif Davis had the ball on the left hand side, bear in mind they don't play a back five, as he went to cross the ball in, and I was actually screaming at the TV, and I'll tell you why this makes sense to United. There was probably 4 or 5 times where he went to cross the ball in. Delap made an air post run. They had no one else in the box, and then the right-sided midfielder was arriving late into the box to try and pick up the pieces. But the reason they were doing that is because they didn't want to get transitioned on. So every time the ball broke, Doku was 1v1 against the right back, Haaland was 2v1 against centre back. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. Like, although you've lost 6-0, it's a bad example. I can see why you're not putting your right sided midfielder right into the box because you're worried about Gavardio coming down the other side. When I was watching United, the ball's on the right hand side and even the left hand side, to be honest. And as the fullback stroke wing back came inside, I was like, the option for him to pass to changes every single time. And tactically speaking, if you've watched or played football, that's not what's meant to happen. So if you watch Liverpool Brentford, every time the ball was wide with Trent, Szoboszlai would always be the cutback option. Salah would either be the wide option or be the one that arrives onto the penalty spot. Honestly, watch the game back and it happens over and over. And that's, for some fans will go, that's really frustrating. That's football now. It's systematic. There's a direction. There's a plan. With United, and I agree with you. Change the wing backs, and you have a better chance of having a plan. At the moment, your wing backs don't want the ball in high areas, and that's your entire system. That's just the whole thing just falls flat on its face.
I mean, look at it like everything you've said there, so spot on. And if your wing backs are not going forward, you've got a striker like Xerxes that doesn't want to penetrate spaces. And let's just say you have Hoyland there who does want to penetrate spaces, but he can't make the ball stick. So then, how are you going to establish territory going forwards? And then, even if you did get into territory going forwards, How are you going to unlock that defense? How are you going to stretch it? So it's like these very basic questions are not being addressed even at a selection level,
Mm.
and that's on Amorim. I know the players might not be good enough, but you've got to at least put together a cohesive structure first, and then if the players are not doing the business, then you can say, well, that's the players' fault. And I
Mm.
know it's the players' fault as well, 100%. I'm not saying the players are good enough, but I'm saying I don't think United have had a manager in so many years who just puts together like a cohesive, very modern elite structure. I still haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Let's talk about individuals because I watched the Southampton game and Southampton did their homework, pressed the centre backs, and then when the ball went wide, and we're going to talk about these wing backs again, they knew that Dallo was going to pop it inside to Kobe Mainu or Ugarte, and they knew Matsurawi was going to do the same because neither of these two wing backs are actual wing backs. They don't. I don't know why he doesn't play Dallo on the right hand side because I think it would be more natural for him because I've seen him take players on occasionally. It's not his bag, but it gives you more variation. Then the moment the ball went into Mino and Ugarte, this either the highest midfielder would jump to press and would win the ball back, or both midfielders would basically they were almost pressing in a five. Exact same thing happened today. And United lost the ball in midfield over and over and over again. And I don't even blame Ugarte because some fans were saying he had a stinker today. I was going, but when he gets the ball, he's got no options. So like, and he's not this dynamic midfielder. Like he's not Modric. He's not going to get the ball and drop a shoulder pass or and open the pitch up. And neither's Kobe Minu at this moment in time. That is a reoccurring problem, and that brings me to the individual I know you definitely want to talk about, and I think he's actually been okay for Manchester United, but Matt Shrawi as this right wing back. Um, obviously, you don't like him there.
I hate him there. He's putting stinker after stinker in that role for me. It's weird because his defending becomes worse in that role. For some reason, because he's very high up the pitch, that then gives the opposition winger more space to get into a foot race with him. Now, you said you've played fullback as well, so you probably might understand this. When you're up against a winger by the halfway line, that's scary, especially if you've got a slight lack of pace. Because if that guy just knocks it around you, you're then having to sprint very large distances against a fellow sprinter who's probably a better sprinter than you. So then you can easily get beat. And once that person's cut across you, they're gone, right? Whereas if you're a very when you're a fullback who's dropping into your own territory, say into your defensive third, then you can manage the space around you a lot better. Then even if there was a little foot race, it's over a shorter distance, so you can probably keep up. So, for example, if I'm up against a Gareth Bale and I'm trying to defend against him by the halfway line, that's scary because if he can do
Mm.
that thing where he runs off the pitch, comes back onto the pitch, and he's gone. A bit like how Maicon tried to defend against him. So the only way you would try and defend against Bale is like have it 2v1 when it's higher up the pitch, outnumber him, and then try and defend against him closer to your own edge of your own box. That's probably the only way you'd have a chance, possibly. And anyway, bringing it back to Matsurawi, he's not suited to defending higher up the pitch. He just hasn't got the athleticism for it. You need
Mm.
players like Dumfries, like these athletic specimen type wingbacks. You can't have a guy like Matsurawi. He's way too slow. So he needs to be playing one of the wide centre back positions, and he offers nothing going forwards. Absolutely nothing. Doesn't even put cross in. There's no goal for it. Absolutely useless going forwards.
It's a big issue because I think you can't underestimate the value of wing backs in a system where you play two narrow tens. You basically lose all your width if your wing backs don't want to play wing back.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not just about sticking players out there and having an option. The problem is when the ball gets to these guys, they're just not comfortable. And I don't blame either Dallo or Matsurawi. Matsurawi, for me, and I think you've said this as well, should play as a right-sided centre back.
Yeah.
I think that's the most suited position for him. The problem Amorim's got is trying to crowbar in as many centre backs as possible. Let's talk about another individual very quickly. Onana didn't have his best game, shall we say?
Truth be told,
Yeah.
I think he started the season well, but he's been shocking recently. I know some people are now calling for Bayendir to basically become number one. I mean, he had a terrible first game. He had a brilliant second game against Arsenal. But I think it makes sense to me to drop Onan and give Bayendi a run, and just make it competitive between the two. Like if you're making errors, then yeah, you deserve to be benched. So I've got no issues with that. I just think there's much more deeper problems in the goalkeeper at Manchester United. I think for me, it's an uneducated fan, one that says, "Oh, it's so difficult playing in front of that clown or whatever." Like, trust me, there's far more deeper problems at Manchester United than the goalkeeper. I think Onana, if he was in front of a settled side that he could trust everyone around him and he was part of a good footballing team, I think his head would be in a better place and I think his
Mm.
performances would be better. I think he's one of those who he, he strikes me as a bit of an emotional, sensitive soul, and he's in a really bad club situation here. And I think it's getting to him. I think, and it's affecting his performances.
Yeah, I think the easy thing to do is just keep going, like replace this guy and replace this guy. But honestly, like as I've said so many times, and as I say every time, psychology is one of the biggest things in football. I said it on a TikTok, and very quickly I'll refer to the TikTok. Darwin Nunez scored that second goal against Liverpool like he's been scoring 50 goals his entire career because he scored the first one. Because honestly, I've seen when he came on, if you haven't watched that game, he balloons one 50 yards over the bar from about 30 yards out for no reason whatsoever. He scores a tap in, and then his next touch is that goal.
Yeah,
And if I just sent someone a clip of that one goal, they'd go, he's bagging 30 a season.
yeah,
That's completely psychological.
100%.
He tells you he's got the physicality, he's got all the physicals, he's got all the talent. It's just mentally, it's not in the right place at the right time. And I think Onana's unfortunately in that position at the moment. Because if you watched Inter versus Man City in that Champions League final, which is where everyone refers back to,
Yeah,
Onana was Inter's best player.
yeah. He's
Um,
fantastic in that final.
yeah. We haven't spoken much about Brighton, but we did say obviously in midfield that's where I think they were far more aggressive, far more front footed than Manchester United. I don't mean midfield versus midfield. I mean just they won that battle in midfield, which is a recurring theme for Manchester United. Carlos Baleba's got a lot of fans at the moment. He was wonderful again.
Yeah, I mean, he's been linked to every big club at the moment, and we're planning to do a video on him fairly soon. So I'm quite excited to delve into him a bit deeper. I just think his passing stood out for me today. That first pass over the top with his left foot. I mean, I don't know if he's right footed or left footed. To be honest with you, I mean, some of his long shots he took. I mean, there's one that was like he looked like it was going to go out of play, but he struck Harry Maguire so hard that I mean, I know he's called Slabhead, but I felt like even the slab was about to crack after that. After that, but yeah, he just
Yeah,
he set the tone for Brighton on and off the ball, and then the gritty dance. I don't know if you've seen that post as
yeah.
well. Like people just
I got a lot of time for that.
people just taking the mick now out of United. To be honest,
Yeah, I've got a lot of time for the greedy dance. Mate, not the dance per se. The fact that he did it in the tunnel at OT says a lot about a player. I
yeah,
think when they do things like that and they actually back it with on the pitch
100%.
performances. Um, I think like I can appreciate that. There's a I won't mention the player, but I'm sure people remember there was a player who didn't feature in the Champions League a few years back, and there was a very famous video of him getting a haircut with a medal in his mouth. Um, I'll tell you who the player was after, but he didn't play, and I was like, that's not a good example to set. Um, finally, Matoma and Minter throwback winger. It was Robin and Duff today. That's how I felt anyway watching them. It was like gone are the days of wingers linking up, but these two are linking up.
Yeah, I mean, before the game, in our sort of group WhatsApp conversations, I was saying watch Mitoma for this game purely because he's been playing well this season, but it was more the fact that after what happened to Yoro from from Suleimana, I was worried that Mitoma up against Yoro would be a big issue. It actually transpired that he was put on the opposite side against Minter, which is not any less of a prospect to go up against, but like I mentioned, because Matsurawi is high up the pitch, and then De Ligt has these moments where he just doesn't know where he is. Sometimes Mitoma really took advantage of that. He was really attacking the space well, and once he's through in that position, he's someone who's always got his head up. So he's found that pass to Minter as well. So those two were two Brighton standout players in the front four. João Pedro also played quite well as well. For
And João Pedro has a lot of these games where you don't really see what he does unless you watch 90 minutes of the
yeah,
game, and he just drags defenders around, like, and defenders get hooked to him because he's physical and he wants to battle. Reminds me a little bit of Giroud. I don't mean in terms of like how they play, but in terms of Giroud's such a scrapper that like the moment the ball gets fired into him, a defender's like, I'm gonna get it off you.
I was going to say Richarlison
Yeah, that's another like great
because he's a
example.
bit more
Like,
mobile than.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I just mean in terms of like the whole like the magnet side of
Yeah,
him. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like Giroud will like want the ball at his neck so that he can suck a defender out, and João Pedro does that so well. He's also technically such a wonderful player.
yeah,
Huge fan of that front three. Like if you're coming up against that front three and you've got a leaky defense or a wobbly defense who are not physically at it, then you've got big problems. That's exactly what happened today. All right. This has been a long one, but obviously it is going to be because we're talking about Manchester United. This is your team. But if you've enjoyed this one, we honestly had the pick of the bunch this weekend, by the way. I wanted to talk about Arsenal Villa. I wanted to talk about Liverpool Brentford. I wanted to talk about this game. I also wanted to talk about City because they won 6-0, but probably with a bit more context when they're playing the Champions League. That might be a better conversation. But as always, let us know in the comments. Whether on Spotify or YouTube, what you thought of the game and what your thoughts were on the analysis. Someone very kindly said after the Omar Marmouche video, this is not analysis. So if that's also your thoughts, then bring them to the table. Because when I asked him, why is that? He said, well, he's just a left winger, innit? And I was like, well, that's also not analysis. Should have paid more attention to the video. But we appreciate all the love and even the hate sometimes. Keep it coming. We'll see you on the next one.